don't know about you, but I've been enjoying looking back at these Old Testament stories. And we've got another one this week. We've actually moved on from Judges. We're into Samuel. And something struck me when I started to read the story of Samuel. We always look to the story where Samuel is with Eli. Yeah, I was thinking of Elijah then, but Eli. We always think of the story when Samuel's with Eli and he's called. But he starts 2 chapters before that. And so we're looking at all 3 chapters. But the thing that struck me was Samuel's mum. And all the stories we've been looking at, or most of the stories we've been looking at just recently, have all started with somebody's mum. We look at Moses. Moses' mum had the courage to hand Moses over to God in a basket. You look at Samuel, Samson. Samson's mum had the courage to say, if, I'll give him over to you. Samuel's mum, again, a barren lady who had the mickey taken out of her by a counterpart, because back then they had more than one wife. The other wife had got children, and every time they went to sacrifice to God and give thanks, she would take the mickey out of Samuel's mum. And Samuel's mum had the courage to go and sit and pray. And Eli saw her praying, and this makes me think as well. Eli saw her praying and thought she was drunk. The reason he thought she was drunk because there were no words coming out of her mouth. She was praying in silence, but actually speaking the words in silence. And Eli thought she was drunk. And when she explained to Eli, because Eli were kicking her out of the church that she was in, out of the building, it was out of the tent, he's kicking her out because she wasn't doing what was expected. And then she explained to Eli what she was doing. And at that point he said, "May God bless you. May God grant you what you desire." She started with prayer. In her desperation, she went to God in prayer. And she said to God, "If you grant me a child, I will dedicate him totally to you, and he will do your work." And she had the courage. It sounds like she didn't have the courage to carry out her convictions at first, because she says to her husband, "I'm going to stay at home until this child is weaned, and then I will come up to the temple with you, or to the place of offering, and offer my sacrifices at that point." And her husband has the courage to say, "Okay, you stay at home until the child's weaned, and then..." And yet she carries out a conviction. Once the child's weaned, she goes up to make sacrifice. And she hands the child over to Eli to look after. She has that courage. The courage to go through with the convictions of her prayers. She just didn't make an idle promise to God. She made a promise that if you give me a child, I will give him back to you. Totally. And that meant leaving him behind. And we're not talking about a young man, we're talking about a child. He's just been weaned, and she hands him over to Eli to become a servant in the temple. It doesn't start with Samuel. It starts with his mum. And we too often forget that it starts with a mum. The one thing I used to love in Israel is that mums have a lot more authority than what you think. Israel, wives still belong to their husbands. It's not like in this country. Wives still belong to the husbands. You cannot just leave your husband in Israel. And even if you get divorced, you still come under the authority of the husband's family. But in the marriage unit, the wife has a lot of authority. The wife is the only person that can stop her eldest son going into the army. Well, the husband can't. The husband has no authority in that role. The wife is the only person that can stop her husband going to a son going to fight in the army. She can't stop a second or a third or a fourth son, but she can stop the first. And the first son has no say in it. If she decides he's not going, he's not going. That's the end of the story. The state won't accept him. If mum says no. These mums in the Old Testament had authority. An authority that we don't recognize. Because we think that the women were under authority completely. They had authority that we don't recognize, and God gave them authority. She had the authority, Samuel's mum had the authority to say, if you give me a child, I will give him back to you. You didn't read anywhere where it said that his dad said that. But she had that great courage and great spirituality of being able to say, Father, if you give me a child, I'll give him back to you. I love this story because it also goes on and says that she gave Samuel over to God, and God blessed her. And she has other children. She has so many sons and so many daughters because she was willing. She was willing to do what she said she would do. She didn't make an idle promise. She went through with it. Didn't matter what anybody else thought or said, she went through with it. And I think sometimes that's where we miss out. We say we'll do something for God, but we don't go through with it. We might get part way through it, but then it's, well, does it really matter? I've done as much as I can do now. I'll step back. It's no longer this lady took a child and gave him over to God. And I think that's just incredible that happened. That she was willing just to take the child and give him over to God. But in the middle of this story, or in the middle of this truth, Eli's family had been given the authority to be the priests in Israel. And Eli's sons let him down. There's a whole bunch of things in this whole thing. We're in chapter 2, and we're looking Eli's family, Eli's sons. And it says in chapter 2, verse 12, Eli's sons were wicked men. They did not respect the Lord or the priests' share of their sacrifices from the people. When anyone offered a sacrifice, the priest's servants would come with a 3-pronged meat fork while the meat was boiling and plunge it into the container, kettle or cauldron or cooking pot. The priest would claim for himself whatever meat the fork brought up. This is the way they treated all the Israelites who came there to Shiloh. Even before the fat was burned, the priest's servants would come and say to one who was sacrificing, "Give me the priest's meat to roast, because he won't accept boiled meat from you, only raw." These two sons were starting to get what wasn't theirs. They'd stopped going with the fork and just plunging it in and getting what God provided on the fork. They started going to people and saying, "We no longer want the boiled meat, we want the raw meat. The raw meat's more valuable because you get more of it. Because you're not plunging in your fork to pick out what it is, but you can choose the choice bits." And that's before God gets his share. So these two guys had started going. If the person said to him, "The fat must be burned first, then you can take whatever you want for yourself," the servant would reply, "No, I insist that you hand it over right now. If you don't, I'll take it by force." You know, Eli's sons were letting him down. They weren't doing what Eli had instructed them to do, what God had instructed Eli to do, what God had instructed Eli's ancestors to do, so that they would continue in the priesthood. We'll get down to verse 22. Now Eli was very old. He heard about everything his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they were sleeping with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He said to them, "Why are you doing these things? I have heard about your evil actions from all these people. No, my sons, the news I hear the Lord's people spreading is not good." You see, the problem is when we start doing things wrong, people start spreading the news. It spreads real easy. I used to tell my students, if you want to start a good business, you have to do things right. It's because if you do things right, somebody may tell one other person or two other people that you've done a good job. If you do something wrong, they will tell at least 10. Because you tell people about somebody that's done something wrong to you much more than you do somebody that's done something right to you. It's a fact. Because we're angry. We've been ripped off. And the people were being ripped off, and so they were telling everybody what was going on. And so the people got to know quickly. I will tell you, it's true that we only tell one or two people when something good has happened to us. And I think that's one of the reasons why sharing on a Sunday morning is important. We can share with everybody what God has done for us, but we don't. We tend to keep it to ourselves. If something bad has happened, we're quite happy to share it. But when something good happens, we're very reluctant to share what's happened to us. eventually a prophet is sent to Eli. And we get down to verse 30 in chapter 2. Therefore, this is the declaration of the Lord, the God of Israel. I did say that your family and your forefathers' family would walk before me forever. But now this is the Lord's declaration. No longer for those who honor me I will honor, but those who despise me will be disgraced. Look, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your forefathers' house, so that none in your family will reach old age. You will see distress in the place of worship. In spirit, in spite of all that is good in Israel, and no one in your family will ever again reach old age. Any man from your family I do not cut off from my altar will bring grief and sadness to you. All your descendants will die violently. This will be the sign that will come to you concerning your 2 sons. Both of them will die on the same day. Then I will raise up a faithful priest for myself. He will do whatever is in my heart and mind. I will establish a lasting dynasty for him, and he will walk before my anointed one for all time. Anyone who is left in your family will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread. He will say, please anoint me to some priestly office so I can have a piece of bread to eat. God watches what we do. We too often lie about what God is like. We expect him to be this lovely, cozy, caring God, which he is. But there's also the other side of him that says, if you do anything wrong to me, this is going to be the consequence. And you know, so too often we sit back and we brush away the consequences because it's comfortable for us to do so. No, we serve a loving God. He wouldn't do that. Hang on. Read throughout all the Old Testament what he does, including some of the stories in the New Testament. You know, the man and wife that took part of what they'd sold to the disciples. Oh, is everything we've sold, it's all. And what did God do? Slayed them both. There are consequences to what we do. And too often, we don't look at what we're doing. Eli was going through that. Eli wasn't a bad man. It was his sons that caused the problem. But God said, that's it. I've had enough. No longer will your line be a priestly line. I'm going to raise up somebody new. We're going to do things differently. And Eli, being a godly man, got ready for that. That's at the point God starts to speak to Samuel and call him. That's at the point when God calls Samuel and he goes to Eli and says, did you call me? And he goes to Eli 3 times. Did you call me? And Eli says, no, go lie down. Next time it happens, just say, here I am, Lord, speak to me. And so Samuel lays down the Lord said to Samuel, I am about to do something in Israel that everyone who hears about it will shudder. On that day I will carry out against Eli everything I have said about his family from beginning to end. It starts to tell Samuel everything he's going to do to Eli's family. And the next morning, Samuel gets up and he goes to Eli. And Eli says to him, what was the message he gave you? Eli asked. Don't hide it from me. May God punish you and do so severely if you hide anything from me that he has told you. Eli has a faith in God even though he knows what's going to happen to his family. And he says to Samuel, don't hide anything from me. Tell me everything that God's told you. And so Samuel does. Samuel tells Eli everything that God's told him. And Eli blesses him for it. Samuel then goes on to become a great prophet. You see, the whole thing about this story is that we've got a mum that's willing to dedicate a son totally and give him to God. She has that much respect for God that she's willing to say that, and she gives him over to God. We have the other side of the family or the other family that should be priestly and doing things right that are not. And God says, I'm going to sort that out. And he takes the priestly values from one family and gives them to the other. Because this group are not doing it properly. So he takes it off of them and gives it to Samuel. So he takes it off of Eli's family and gives it to Samuel and starts the descendancy from Samuel for the priestly reign. God looks for the right people. But if the people that he's chosen start to do it wrong, he'll find somebody else. If he's chosen us to do something and we start doing it wrong, he'll find somebody else. If he's chosen us to do something and we're not doing it, he'll find somebody else. And we've got to be aware of that. I think most of these Old Testament stories tell us, one, that God wants us to dedicate ourselves to him. Two, don't go off his beaten track. Do what he's telling you to do. Because if you do go off, there are consequences. And three, if we do go off, he will pass it on to somebody else. And that's for us as individuals, it's for us as a church. We have to be looking to God and what he's doing. Where does he want us to be? What does he want us to do? And we have to continue looking at all times. It's not just a one-off. It's not just, we'll have a prayer meeting next week and we'll ask God what he wants us to do and then we'll get on and do it. We'll have a prayer meeting next week and we'll have one the week after and we'll have... It's not a weekly thing either. It's a daily thing with God. We need to ask him daily what he wants us to do. Eli was serving God daily. He didn't just go to Shiloh once a year. Eli was in Shiloh. He was the priest there. He had to serve God daily. We need to serve God daily. Not just weekly, not just monthly, but daily. We have to ask God what he wants us to do daily. so that we're keeping on the right track every day. Because it's too easy to wander off. See, there's a great section, and I can't just find it now. I read it earlier on this morning, but it's mixed in there somewhere. That we need to look at where we're going, what we're doing. It's always looking forward, not looking backwards. We always look to what God wants us to do, not what we want to do. And that's what God wants you to do. He wants you to look forward all the time. And keep going forward. It's a great prayer that Hannah prayed in chapter 2, starting at verse 1. Hannah prayed, "My heart," this is after she's given Samuel over, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My arm is lifted up by the Lord. My mouth boasts over my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one beside you, and there is no rock like our God. Do not boast so proudly, or let arrogant words come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge and action, and actions are weighed by him. The bows of the warriors are broken, but the feeble are clothed with strength. Those who are full of hire themselves out for food, but those who are starving, hungry no more. The woman who is childless gives birth to 7, but the woman with many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He sends some down to Shiloh, and he rises others up. The Lord brings poverty and gives wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the trash heap. He seats them with noblemen and gives them a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. He has set the world on them. He guards the steps of his faithful ones, but the wicked perish in darkness. For a person does not prevail by his own strength. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will be thunder in the heavens against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king. He will lift up the horn of his anointed. What a prayer for a mum to pray. She was willing. And in her willingness, Samuel started to serve God. And he became a great servant. In chapter 3, verse 19 to the end. Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and he fulfilled everything. Samuel prophesied. All Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was a confirmed prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear in Shiloh, because there he revealed himself to Samuel by his word. And Samuel's words came to all Israel. Because a mum was willing, her son's words went to all Israel. Are we willing to serve God in that way? by what we do today affects tomorrow. By what we do as a church today will affect the future. What our ancestors did in this church 50 years ago affected us today. Because if those 12 people hadn't come here 50 years ago, we wouldn't have been here today. What we do today will affect this church in 50 years' time. And you may say, what about today? I want to see what God's going to do. I tell you, I'd love to see what God's going to do in this place. But I'm quite happy to accept that I am here to do a job that God wants me to do. He wants me to start something that's going to affect the future. And I may never ever see it. But that doesn't matter. I may never ever see every seat in this sanctuary filled. But that doesn't matter, because I know God's going to do it. I may never ever see the fact that there are 1,000 people coming into this building every week to worship. But that doesn't matter. What I have got to say is, here I am, wholly available. As for me, I will serve the Lord. Nothing else. That's what I've got to be able to say. And I said that many years ago in Prestati. I went to a performance by Saltmine. And the song they were singing every week was, "Here I am, wholly available." And that was the sending song. And they asked you not to sing. Earl mentioned it on Wednesday evening, and it brought it back. They asked you not to sing it unless you meant it. No point in singing these words, "Here I am, wholly available," if you're not. Because we have to be wholly available. That means everything. Not just a little bit of my life, it means all of it. Believe you me, Earl was saying that somebody had sung it and all sorts of things happened. I sang it, all sorts of things happened. I ended up on a 4-week tour with Saltmine from that concert. They said they needed an engineer. All my mates were nudging me in the ribs and saying, "John, it's you. Off you go." And from that night on, I went on. And I've served the Lord ever since. Wherever He's wanted me to go, whatever He's wanted me to do, that's what I've done. So if you're willing to sing it, expect the consequences that come with it. Don't sing it if you're not wholly available. We are going to sing it again this morning. It's all right, we've got it on. When we were singing the first song this morning, it suddenly came back to me, and I thought, we need to sing this. If we are wholly available, if you are willing to be wholly available, and that might mean that you've got to give up your son or something that's really precious to you. It may be that you've got to be a Samuel and listen to God calling you and prophesy and become a great prophet to the whole world. It may be that you've just got to go sit on the wall and wait for somebody to come to talk to you. I don't know what God's got in store for you. I know He's sending it. When I sang it, I ended up going all over the world. But be prepared. And if God's going to send you, He'll send you. But are you wholly available this morning? If you are, sing this song. Let's sing it, Jonathan.